Beverly Behan is the president of Board Advisor LLC and an internationally recognized expert in governance. She spoke at a recent Strategic Capability Network panel in Toronto. Beverly sat down with Canadian HR Reporter TV to tell us how to maximize your boardroom effectiveness. So what are some of the most common mistakes that senior executives tend to make when they're engaging with their boards?
Executives are often, they're high-performing people, they're very focused, and they tend to go into sell and tell mode a lot more than they go into having a conversation, having a dialogue with the board. The board, however, wants to put their fingerprints on an issue. They want to get engaged around that issue. And so many executives will go into a board meeting and basically declare success because they, went through their slides, they made all their points, had almost no time for questions and got out of the room. That actually is very often failure because the board hasn't really engaged with the executive. They don't feel they really understand what the issue was that they were being asked to make a decision about as well as they could have if they would have had that dialogue. And really the hallmark of a highly effective executive in working with the board is the ability to really engage the board effectively around the key issues. So that requires a skill to kind of, when you're thinking about how you're going to present, say there's 10 issues in an acquisition or something, focus on 2 or 3 that you might really want the board's input on. And even lay that out in the pre-reading material and really go after that. That doesn't mean the board isn't free to talk about other issues, right? But really engage the board in a dialogue around some of those issues and listen to what the board has to say instead of just going into this defensive mode, this sort of steamroller, almost sell and tell. I think those are kind of some of the biggest mistakes.
You said there isn't really much formalized training in business school when it comes to dealing with boards. So what's the best way to learn how to be effective in the boardroom?
I do a lot of work in CEO succession planning, and I had a particular client that was in the midst of their CEO succession plan, and their top candidate went into a very important board meeting. It was a board strategy retreat, showed up with about 100 slides that were actually prepared by an external consulting firm, and essentially read through these slides. By the end of that meeting, the board went into an in-camera session and basically really questioned whether they could make this person CEO and send them to meet with the Wall Street analysts and things like that. So to get back to your question, what did we do? We went out and actually got feedback for that person, very specific feedback. I actually called up every board member and talked to them for about half an hour, not only about that executive and not only that specific presentation, but how she'd been presenting to the board for the last couple of years, actually, and also got feedback for 2 or 3 other executives, very, very specific. And this was so helpful to them because the board actually was very specific in saying, this is what you need to improve. And she had this steamroller effect in how she presented. She didn't have eye contact. Often she sat down as opposed to standing up. The board couldn't even see her. No one had given her this feedback, though. The CEO would say things like, gee, that didn't go very well. But, and I think she knew it wasn't going very well. But this was a level of specificity that was actionable. And so she made some really important changes, and so did the other 3 people that we provided their feedback to, and that helped them a lot. Now, I'm not necessarily sure you have to do as robust a process as we did. I think it's useful for the CEO to actually say to the board in an executive session, I would really like some constructive feedback for some of my executives on how they did today.
In regards to CEO succession planning, why is it so important to have a well-considered transition process?
Well, it's really less about the transition process than a well and thorough CEO succession plan. There was some really scary data that came out of the United States a couple of years ago, and unfortunately there's no comparable Canadian data I'm aware of. And it said that of the Fortune 500, 30% didn't have any kind of plan, even a hit-by-bus plan, even though 95% of them said in their corporate governance guidelines that they did. Arguably, the choice of chief executive officer is the single most important decision that a board is going to make. And there's a lot of steps in that process. In many cases, boards apply nowhere near the level of due diligence and do not have a robust enough and well-considered process in doing that. And they're making kind of knee-jerk decisions. I think, we talked earlier about there's a tendency sometimes to almost reward the person who, he's done a great job or she's done a great job as chief financial officer, or he or she ran this business unit, really increased the market share, and yet that person may not really have the capabilities you need in terms of a new CEO going forward because the world changes so rapidly.